before I introduce myself, I would like to put a seed inside everybody's brain. How about when I tell you that architecture is basically everything around us, from the space that we have around us to the space we have around us when we walk out the street, including our streets, including our sidewalks, even the bathrooms that we use every day. It's all about architecture. The goal with this class is not really to make anybody here become an architect after 8 weeks, because that's not going to happen. But the goal is to appreciate everything around us with different eyes. So I know for sure everybody who is going to immerse in this experience today is going to see everything around with different eyes. And that is an asset for everybody. So welcome to this 8 weeks program. It's a pleasure to be here today with all of you and being able to share what I like the most in my career, which is architecture and urban planning. All right. Who am I, everybody? Well, my name is Carolina Newburn Fonseca. Some of you already know me. It's a pleasure to be here. And I've been working with architecture since 1997. I know those things are hard to say because we start aging ourselves, right? But you got to understand where all of this is coming from that you're experiencing today. So I'm in New York. I live in New York since 2006, and here I work with urban planning, healthcare, corporate, and retail design. Some of the most famous projects I worked with was Gin Lane. It was a restaurant that was in the meatpacking district. I remember when this project opened, they had one big celebrity to open, Fergie. I don't know if you remember the singer. Lenny's Sandwich Shop, which they started. They wanted to be something like Subway, wanted to introduce themselves in New York as the new Subway for fast food. So that's who they are. Oh, let me see. Did I click that accidentally? All righty. And Dylan's Candy Bar. Not sure if some of you know Dylan's Candy Bar, but they are a candy store. The owner is Ralph Lauren's daughter, Dylan. They closed the flagship store, but their concept design is everywhere in the country, in malls, inside department stores, inside airports, and a lot of different areas. Waffles and Dinges is another big project. They started as a food truck. They now have stores in the Mall of America. They have stores in the East Village, and they have stores in Colorado now in a train station, one of the most famous train stations. And Joni Utah, which was a restaurant down below the Rockefeller Center. So Hospital for Special Surgeries is one of the places where I do a lot of designs, and that's healthcare. Hopefully none of you experienced surgeries in that hospital, but it's part of what I did. So I brought you a few pictures. This is Jillian, and that's the candy bar that I helped with the design. Her store is all about colors, and this is architecture as well. So next time you go to a store, you might be able to look around and see someone was thinking about every single detail, every single color, every single shape behind it. You're going to step on an experience and notice that that floor was picked by a professional, that wall color had a lot of minds thinking about what would make people feel happier or more excited to spend their money, and what size depended on every single decision. For example, this store, we had to be very creative in order to make people excited to spend money and buy as much as possible. Some of it we call cross sale. That's downstairs in the store where we decided to create a chocolate world. As you can see, dripping all of this yummy chocolate to the shelving units. This is the chocolate fountain. We call the chocolate world. Even the drawers here in the bottom, they were for storage, but we created chocolate bars in different flavors. And this area here, still in Dylan's Candy Bar, is what we call the nostalgia area. Very interesting. So we have over 7,000 types of candy in this store. Knowing that inventory and creating this place for it was a challenge. But that's part of architecture. Even how we sell things in a store becomes a project. That's upstairs where they have the party room. We created booths so people can enjoy an experience. There we go. Do you have a sweet tooth? Dylan's Candy Bar, we know, and this is now Waffles and Dinges. It always started with a food truck around New York. And then one day I was invited to create a concept so they could be in every single part in New York City. Well, they won the competition and they are now in every single park in New York City. Part of the architecture was also thinking about how they would present that waffle to the public. And as you can see, they created what they call the waffle meter. So the waffle is here, and as you start eating it, you see plenty left to share. Think twice before sharing and forget about sharing at this point. But as we go forward in our course, in our program, I'm going to tell you more about all of these projects. But this one was inspired in a very famous painter. His name is P.M. Mondrian, where we have all of these squares and rectangles and inspired to create the card. And that's a picture of the project. This is healthcare design. And we created a room where people can stay. It looks hospitality, right? It looks like a hotel, but it's a room where people can stay in when they are recovering from surgery. Now I invite you to look at this. This is a cafeteria, right? And even in a cafeteria, you can't believe there is an architect behind it, but there is. Thinking about the heights for you to better serve yourself when you get in your ice cream or you get in your juice or you get in your condiments, right? Or even in a trash can, refuse receptacle, what is the ideal scenario when you're trying to experience a store? And this is, for example, a welcome area to a hospital. So what's the elevator lobby looking like? So next time you go up and down in the elevator, remember, someone was thinking about all of these details. And even in the operating room, for example, this is the operating room where you probably knocked out with your anesthesia. There was an architect there thinking about how this employees are working, if it's safe, if it's beautiful, and if it's functional, right? Even the bathrooms, like we said in the beginning, or even in the recovery rooms. Offices as well. Is the height for you to write on your desk appropriate? How far is your table from your chair? All of those ergonomics are part of what we do. I hope my introduction wasn't too fast. So that's a little bit of my background. And now I guess I'm ready to share with you a little bit about history of architecture. So let's share now the second part of our program. All right, so in our week number 1, where we entitled History of Architecture and Town Planning, we invite you to go through a delightful journey to what I say is a magical insight that governs all the principles of every building around us. And that brings me back to the first question. When you think about architecture, what comes to your mind? I have 2 words, structures and buildings, or like Leah said, big buildings, right? So let's see. Oftentimes, people say that happiness and misery is the quality of our environment behind those 2 feelings, right? The kind of walls, the kind of chairs, buildings, and streets that surround us. I agree with that saying. So I'm going to read it once again so we can absorb that. One of the great, often unmentioned causes of both, there is a typo there, of both happiness and misery is the quality of our environment, the kind of walls, chairs, and buildings, and streets that surround us. And yet, a concern for architecture and design is too often described as frivolous, even self-indulgent. Where we are heavily influences who we can be. We can even say that it is architecture's task to stand as an eloquent reminder of our full potential. Many architects are wary of openly discussing the word beauty. This word will be the center of our 8 classes program in a tour through the philosophy and psychology of architecture that aims to change the way we think about our homes, our businesses, our streets, and ourselves. Welcome to the journey through the world of architecture. Please make some notes, write your insights, and make it unforgettable. Here are a few suggested materials for you to get so we can accomplish 8 weeks with lots of notes. Number one will be a notebook, ideally 8.5 by 11, which is our letter size. If you have graph paper, which is the one on the right with the little squares, would be perfect. If you don't worry about it. Don't sweat. This will just make your life easier. Flare felt tip black pen. Papermate has it, which is the one on the right. That makes everybody's life easier when making drawings. An eraser, maybe a mechanical pencil if you have HB 0.9 millimeters. That's much easier to sketch on. Highlighters, any color is fine. Camera for photo can be your phone. So you can take photos of the slides we're going to share throughout this program. And most importantly, a very curious mind. Be curious about everything you're going to see because that's part of architecture. Ask questions, ask yourself 1 million questions as you start walking around the house after this class tonight. Please keep writing down your possible comments or questions. And I remind you that we're going to allow some time at the end to go through it all. Hopefully we'll have that time.
Hey, sorry about that. Your father and I got phones like yours yesterday, and we're both just having a terrible time getting used to them.
Is that with us? I guess there was a microphone issue, right, Miriam? All righty. So let's go to the next one. Now we spoke about structures, we spoke about buildings, we spoke about materials. But the biggest question when you talk about history of architecture is, where did it originate? Where did it all come from, right? And I guess the answer to it, it always started with the need, the humankind need of a shelter. It always started like this. But if you think about it, architecture is now all around us. It basically originated as a protection from the forces of nature. When we say forces of nature, I guess we all can remember the rain from last night in New York, right? Imagine if we didn't have a shelter, right? Well, when we think about 10, 20, 30,000 years ago, we didn't have the architecture we have today. So no matter how humble their hut, people have always aspired to make their shelter more than merely practical. Even within the refuge of caves and cliffs, humans decorated their surroundings with paintings of animals and figures. How many of us visited, for example, the Museum of Natural History and saw all of that ancient decorations? That's how it all started. As nomads, early peoples built temporary dwellings of sticks and animal hides that were easily transported. And guess what? That's something to write down. I see Jenny is making great notes, right, Jenny? Farming led to more permanent walled settlements to guard crops. So next time you go to a farm, I invite you to think about this class today. You're going to notice that people need place to store everything they collect so we don't go hungry, right? Especially going back to the first paragraph, forces of nature. So think about it. Even our streets, it originated from our needs to go from one place to the other. Our sidewalks originated from our need to walk properly and not falling down. Our lights on the street started from us in need to see what's going on at night. So everything started from basically human instinct and human needs. Now, a piece of curiosity, now we're talking about architectural history. One of the earliest cities we have it was Jericho in Jordan, dating from about 8,000 before Christ. Its citizens lived in stone houses with plaster floors, surrounded by high walls and towers, which are considered some of the world's first fortifications. There we go. And on the right here, we can see a picture of what that used to look like and below the map of it. But it ended in an unknown situation, and eventually a new city arises on top of the other, and a new culture takes over the city. Did you ever think about it? All of this existed. At some point, it stopped existing for a variety of reasons, and then a new city arises. The history of architecture traces the changes in architecture through various traditions, regions, overarching stylist trends, and dates. The beginnings of all these traditions is thought to be human satisfying the very basic need of shelter and protection. With that paragraph, I invite you to think about the many places you've been in your life. And if it I'm not talking about different countries. If you did go to different countries, great. But if you didn't, just think about all the different neighborhoods. Little Italy, maybe, or a church, or a synagogue, or a school. All of these different architectures protecting and sheltering different needs, different beliefs, different traditions. Most of it is generated by human needs. And when we talk about human needs, we are stabilizing and equalizing every need across the planet, right? But one thing changes depending on your culture. Do you want to guess what that is? Anybody present? What changes depending on your culture? Anybody?
Aesthetics.
Aesthetics, that's a good guess, Miriam. Well, I'll give you a clue. The answer is color. Color is the only thing that changes. Everything else is going to be based on human instinct when we talk about structures, right? Aesthetics comes with that, so it was a great answer. The term architecture generally refers to buildings. So that goes back to our first guess, right? Structure and buildings, which was excellent. But in its essence is much broader, including fields we now consider specialized forms of practice, such as urbanism, which is all this town planning around us, civil engineering, naval, military, and even landscape architecture. So next time you visit a beautiful garden, believe me, there is a lot of thought behind it. Trends in architecture were also influenced, among other factors, by technological innovations. Think about it. If you go to your doctor right now, most likely they will give you an iPad to do your to be subscribed, right? I'm trying to remember the right word to it. So right now you get an iPad, you're going to go have a seat. But most likely back then, you'd have to go and sit down with the admin person and tell that person all of your background and all of your details. Just an example, or even your desk in your office. Back then, you probably didn't need a computer. But think about it. Right now, you need a computer. Your computer is most likely a flat screen. Back then, it was one of those deep computers, so you would have that corner unit to have that big, deep monitor be able to fit your desk, right? So technological innovations, particularly in the 19th, 20th, and 21st centuries, influenced our trends in architecture. The improvement in our use of steel, cast iron, tile, reinforced concrete, and glass indeed helped, for example, Art Nouveau appear in all of this grandiose architecture. And on the right, if you see, we have an example with the Pantheon, where there was a temple for all the gods, right? And I'm sure the floor plan is probably blocked, right? Can you see the floor plan on the right of the Pantheon? So the fun thing is that the Athene statue was right in the middle, and all these columns were trying to represent people to see that statue. So part of architecture is also a little bit of storytelling. Every detail had a story to tell. So next time we see in this picture, for example, we see Greece, all of these types of classical columns, there is a story behind it, even name behind it. It's always better when we give name for pieces of architecture. And to that point, I also would like to invite you to visit this Wikipedia website, which tells us a lot of details of history throughout our world. Because unfortunately, we have only 1 hour to cover it all. So if you really want to dig deep into architecture, history of architecture, this is a perfect website. There we go. So moving forward, I brought you an example of first architecture in our planet, and this is African architecture in the Zulu tribe. Check it out. This is a floor plan they were able to come up with after archaeologists digged in and found this under the floors we walk in today. You see different kind of materials to build that, different costumes, how many people live in under one single roof. But you can go back to what we spoke in the beginning, which is the human in need of shelter to protect themselves from the forces of nature. Well, now let's talk about inspiration, because inspiration is what moved all of this history of architecture. So after people started sharing in community life, they began turning their attention to architecture that celebrated the spiritual and sacred, right? Their tombs and temples imitated nature in gigantic forms, resembling mountains and other landscape formations. Let's think about the pyramids of the Egypt, right? What is astonishing is that these stone monuments and pyramids were all built without modern tools and machines, requiring a vast amount of labor, endurance, and most likely time, right? But the effort was clearly worth it. Mysterious, abstract, and awesome. The architecture of these ancients still inspires today. Let's think about history. Architecture has stood as a representation of society, reflecting the values, success, and eventual downfall of civilizations over time. From the monumental structures to the residents and buildings that make up the fabric of a city, we can learn a lot about who the people were who inhabited them long before our time. And I'm going to pause this paragraph to invite you now to go back into your background, all of your experience. If you ever went to Manhattan, for example, and you just got off in Grand Central, how many of you did ever take a deep breath admiring that big ceiling with all of these signs of the zodiac and just thought about what it was, the history back then and what it is now? How many people went through all of those, right? And that goes to history representing a society. So by studying the built environment of the past, combined with modern day research on psychology and the environment, we are coming to understand the effects of architecture on people in entirely new ways, which begs the question, just how does architecture impact society? And I know we don't have a lot of time. It's 5:40, we have 20 more minutes, but I would like you to write down on that notebook with that piece of paper, put in your imagination. Did you ever stop to think how architecture impacted everything around us? How we drive, how we walk, how we feel happiness. That goes back to our first slide. Or how we don't feel happiness when we stop into a place, depending on the neighborhood we visit. Well, the importance of architectures. As its roots, architecture exists to create the physical environment in which people live. But architecture is way more than just the built environment. It's also a part of our culture. It stands as a representation of how we see ourselves, as well as how we see the world. Did you ever think about, for example, in India, how we go to all of these beautiful monuments, or in China, those very, very old monuments, how important that is for a society. People go to destination trips to admire all of these translations. right? Excellent. So while the concept of shelter is a fairly simple thing, the shelter, we spoke about it a few times already during this presentation, the style of buildings was originally shaped by the climate of a particular location. Did you ever think about it? We are in New York, where we currently have, and hopefully we stay like that, the 4 seasons, right? We have summer that is really hot. So we have to address that heat with well-conditioned space. Or some place where it's way too hot, we have to think about big balconies that will allow circulation of air. Well, so going back, while the concept of shelter is a fairly simple thing, the style of buildings was originally shaped by the climate of a particular location, what materials were readily available, as well as the values of the society building them. As the world became more and more connected, like globalized, as we say, the styles evolved. But even in modern construction, there is still an importance in honoring the cultural nuances in the built environment. Now, this is bolder now because it's very important. As these evolutions in society and design occur, there is the question of what to do with old, outdated, and run-down buildings. Some modified to take on different functions, while others are demolished, deemed to be beyond repair. Let's make it more tangible, right? Because this is so important. And I phrased it again. This is so important. Remember Penn Station, for example. Where's Penn Station now? It's inside our old post office building, which was in many debates deemed to be demolished. How important is to keep our history? And I guess our history committee in Takaho is probably listening to that, right? It's important because our society, oh, I'm sorry about it. Our society goes through evolution, and so does design. How do we keep the history? How do we keep making what is outdated present in our society? Let's remember that because that's part of our 8 weeks program. Today, we are brushing through all of that. There's also the understanding that architecture is a discipline within itself. And one could argue that it's equally important for architects to continue to push the boundaries of buildings in new ways for the pure pursuit of the craft. But let's remember together throughout these classes here, the way we see architecture is how we're going to shape the future. Did you write that down? Good. The way we see architecture is how we're going to shape the future. And I know Jenny was enjoying that. I'm seeing her reaction and I'm having such a good time seeing that. Thank you, Jenny. Thank you, everybody, for being there today. Thank you, Elaine. Thank you so much, everyone, for being here. I'm hoping I'm bringing you to a new way to see everything around us, because one thing is to walk around this neighborhood and just appreciate. And the other thing is to walk around everything around us and understand this. And that's the goal about understanding architecture, a group of classes. Well, we said all of those beautiful paragraphs. We understand a little bit more. But now I'll give you a very tangible example. Architecture began, said the German architect Louis van der Rohe, who passed in 1969. When two bricks were put together well, that's when architecture began. This might sound facile, right? And yet, he was right. What he meant was that architecture is the self-conscious act of building, not just with common sense, but with artistry too. And that goes back to our first slide, where we said the word beauty. As humans, we are naturally attracted to beauty. And why not being naturally attracted to beauty in architecture? The wheel of an epoch translated into a space, for example. So when you talk about human instinct, when you look at these two pictures, can you compare beauty in that? You can't, right? Some pieces of architecture are timeless. And the secrets behind these timeless pieces of architecture is what I'm going to try to walk you through during this 8-week programs. Because it's just not about just making it beautiful. There is technique behind it. And these guys here who put together the Grand Central Terminal in Manhattan, New York, they knew about that. And maybe Pennsylvania Station, they were focusing more in structure, in building, in techniques, in trends. But focusing in beauty sometimes is way more than just a trend. It goes back to our human instincts and techniques. And probably goes back to how architecture started. Remember, shelter wasn't just a fair coincidence to make people safe or protected, but also human beings started right away decorating that to making them happier. And that goes back to architecture being tied completely close to the idea of making humans more efficient in their workspace or happier in their own homes, right? More than just a building. Now let's talk about town planning. Architecture not only affects society on a high level, but also on a more personal level. It can have a profound impact on its occupants. Everything from the layout of the space to the material finishes that are being used to finish a building can contribute towards occupant health, mood, and productivity. I know this program is for anybody 14 and up, especially for 14 and up. So I'm going to take this paragraph as an opportunity to invite, if we have students here, to go back to your classroom. What would you change in that classroom? Would you make a wall with a happier color, maybe yellow, maybe blue, or maybe would you change the layout of the desk? Would they be connected? Would they have more space between them? Or maybe what kind of materials could be making it less noisy? Could be some sort of fabric on the wall that would absorb sound? Or how about the color temperature? Is it too cold? Is it too blue? Could be more yellow and make you feel calmer? Or is the cafeteria with colors that make you more excited about eating or less excited about eating? So those are the instincts we're going to discuss throughout. And that goes back to town planning as well. Is your street narrow enough? Now think about Barcelona with all of these old alleys that make it so enchanting, so romantic. Or is it too wide that made it look so cold that you were afraid of crossing the street or even driving on it, right? It's been shown that people who work in well-designed spaces take less sick days. Did you know about that? They are more focused and generally they contribute more to their company or to their municipalities. Sterile, concrete landscapes and unimagined buildings can cause higher levels of stress. Yes, they can. That's not me saying, but that's data throughout years of research. Designing buildings as well as cities to combat this unnecessary stress, whether it be beautiful or inspiring architecture or simply a mindful connection to nature, indeed helps humans to feel more relaxed, happy, and engaged. And that's why it's so important for us to talk about these techniques behind architecture. Because even if you're not becoming an architect after this 8 weeks program, you're going to be more aware of your surrounds and probably being able to make small touches here and there to make your life better and probably your family lives much better and even your friends. Why not, right? Well, well-designed architecture and the connection individuals have to it is not something that's easily quantified. However, we all know that the feeling of walking into a space that just feels right. Did you ever feel like that? Did you ever walk into someone's house and say, wow, look at this living room, it's beautiful. And you probably added some sort of adjective to it. You said, this is cozy, or this is very warm, or you said, wow, this is very elegant, right? Or maybe you said something else. You said, wow, this needs some renovation. It looks so bad, or this is so dingy. But we tend to add adjectives to it, right? we can't help ourselves. It's our subconscious level, right? It's not only functional, but it resonates with you on a different subconscious level. While designing for function is certainly crucial, it's important to tap into that emotional connection as well for everything around us. I'm talking about the new chair you're going to buy, which is going to be ergonomic, but you want that to have a very nice warm touch, or you're going to buy new painting to decorate your living room, your bedroom, your office, your hospital, I don't know. But you want to make that emotional connection. And that's how architecture is started. That's all behind the history of everything we see, as they both speak to the sense of experience, architecture, and town planning as well. It's not just an intellectual understanding, but a connection between the user and the space itself in an emotional way. Well, I always like to give you a little bit of the bibliography for the next step. If you have a chance, our library system, Westchester library system, does have those 3 books in Westchester County. You can go ahead and place a hold on that. Those are, especially the center one, Architecture for Dummies, explains all the basics and the techniques. Architectural visual history will give you a very wonderful experience throughout the history of architecture. And on the right, Understanding Architecture and its elements, it's another great suggestion. Here we go. I would like you to take a photo of that. This first 2, you definitely took a photo before, because we spoke about the history of architecture in the first city that is archaeologically proved to be the first city in the world, right? And this next 2 tell you a little bit about different programs to learn about the history of architecture in universities around our state. Well, now I'm going to tell you what the next class is, which is in 2 weeks from now. And it's all posted in the Tuckahoe Library website. You're going to get a reminder, most likely. It's going to be on September 21st. And it's going to be Understanding the Basics of Architecture. We're going to learn the techniques on how to draw and understand an architectural set of drawings, which includes floor plans, elevations, sections, and much more.